When the sun fell, we sealed ourselves inside the apartment. Curtains drawn, lamps extinguished, every thread of light smothered. Only the candle remained, its glow of fragile defense against the night pressing at the windows. Beyond our walls, the earth quaked with distant artillery, the roar of engines ripping the sky apart. Bathory's angels clashed with the tyrant's vultures overhead. Death stalked the air, yet still Mother and Father commanded us to celebrate the new year. Father, born in Kimru, had brought Samhain with him. He told of it often, though his voice shifted with his audience. To the market crowd, he spoke of costumes, of candy and bonfires, of feasts and tricks. But when he whispered to me alone, the mask fell. Then Samhain became a night when the veil thinned, when the dead pressed their faces against ours, and the living glimpsed other world in return. He told of tricksters and treatsters, goblins and robins, of masks that could deceive monsters or hide us among them, of food left out for the wandering dead, sometimes in reverence, sometimes in fear, and sometimes because the living themselves were starving. He spoke of stories told in the dark, stories sharp enough to pierce time itself, where past, present, and future curled together like smoke. When he spoke that way, Samhain felt older than the war, older than nations, older even than death. I could see, with his words, the long journey crossing over Oceanus into Otherworld. I could smell the sea and hear the cries of heroes who bound themselves with their own entrails to continue fighting. I could see the cruel robin stealing babes from their cradles, the goblin cobbler laboring by moonlight until coin broke his charm. His stories made the dead stir at the edges of my sight. But when it came to actually celebrating it, our bonfire was a single stub of tallow, hard-earned from scraps of fat Mother boiled down. We might have sold it for coin, but tonight it burned for us. The candlelight twisted our shadows, tall and grotesque on the peeling walls, each flicker making our bodies seem less our own. Still, it was better than going without any light like we did most nights, unable to even see our own shadows in the darkness of the war. The candle meant that our shadows grew and shrank as the flames danced and burned. Our feast was pitiful compared to Father's tales. Canned tuna, a whisper of cider, a few soul cakes kneaded from stale flour by both my mother and brother. Still, it was a banquet next to the soldiers' rations of black rye, powdered milk, and gritty sausage. Our masks were paper, stripped from Father's hospital work rolls. Crayons stained them with crude faces. Butcher twine cut into our skin as we tied them on. The holes barely let us see, yet when I looked at my family through their masks, they seemed uncanny, half claimed by another world. When silence finally fell outside, when the food was gone and the bottle was empty, we told stories. Candlelight quivered between us, and with the masks on, every word landed heavier, as though each story were no longer told, but conjured. Mother went first. Her mask was green, lips twisted into a grin of gold teeth, a paper crown cocked upon her head. She leaned back in her wooden chair, crossing her arms, her eyes glinting at me and my brother. Her whisper made us lean closer, though part of me wanted to lean away. Mother told us a story about an old witch that ate children to live forever, a witch that would try to trick children into her hut that would move on giant chicken legs. And if there was no children to trick, then she would seek out the children. She would carry with her a magical broom that would let her fly, and if she found any children that were alone, especially good-looking boys and girls like my brother and I, she would take them back to her hut, bathing in their blood to keep her skin healthy, and she would grind their bodies into a mess that even their own parents wouldn't recognize. A witch named Elizabeth Bathory, the same name as Her Excellency. When my mother's voice died, the silence pressed cold fingers down my spine. The candle shrank low, and the shadows towered taller than we were. Valeska stared at the flame, cupping his hand toward it as if he could cradle the fire into eternity without touching it. He would have grabbed the flame in his hands if he wasn't scared of being burned. His longing frightened me more than the dark. Then my father leaned forward. His mask was crimson, scarred with painted warts and stitches, with too many eyes. His shadow split and doubled, twitching behind him as though it might detach. His voice was low, but each pause made the air shiver.
A long time ago, in a place very far from here, there once was a little girl with no father and no mother. But she dreamt of a world of justice, fairness, compassion, and creativity. An imaginary world, but it was her world. Then the little girl did what all little girls do, and she grew up. And now grown, she saw that the world she lived in was nothing like the world of her dreams. So, while the world she was born into grew cold, dark, and cruel, she didn't. She decided to make her world real. She created her perfect imaginary world, and she pried open the gates between the imaginary and the real, and welcomed others to a world without danger. And even now, an eternity later, she still beckons and welcomes any who can travel between the imaginary and the real.
But then his story veered. Mother turned sharply toward him, but he did not falter. The candle dwindled to a nub, shadows swelling monstrous around us. I dared not turn and face my own shadow behind me. My brother's eyelids were heavy, and I kept my eyes on my father's, scared to turn around and face my own shadow.
One Samhain night, a long time ago, back when I was young and still in Saimaru, she came for me. She didn't take me to her world, but rather a world that was between our worlds.
Father murmured. His words no longer sounded like a story, but a confession.
A house that was a home to the lights that shine only in darkness. A haven to heroic horrors. A hell to horrific heroes. A place made to scare, but also to comfort. It was here that I ate candy for the first and last time in my life. I faced challenges just like in the stories of old, and in the center of the house, I was offered a prize.
The wick hissed into an ember. His face vanished into the dark. His voice the only tether, proving I was not alone. Now it felt less like a story he was telling for everyone, and more like it was a story he was telling to just me.
The big-hearted girl offered me a crown, told me that I could be a prince in her lands, that rather than being a peasant, living in a world at war, I could be a royal, living in a world at peace. What I saw in the crown's golden sheen was not myself, but the faces of those left behind in my world. If I ruled as a prince, then I would rule alone, and if I lived as a peasant, I would never be alone. And as I looked closer into that golden reflection, I saw not just the family I would leave behind, but also the family I would never have if I left. I saw in that crown you.
The ember bled out. Darkness smothered us whole. His last word slid through the void like a hiss. My eyelids heavy and soothed by the words of my father. The light gone, I grew heavy with exhaustion.
I saw you, and that is why I refused a gift from a dear friend.
His voice became a lull, sinking into my blood like a spell. I closed my eyes, heavy as stone, and dreamed of that place between places, where the shadows are thicker than flesh, and the light does not comfort, but remembers. I didn't like the apartment block that we lived in. Everything was worn out or a little broken. Lights were dim or flickering, if they worked at all. The apartment door had to be lifted up when it was opened and closed, or it didn't work properly. The people were also worn out or a little broken in many different ways. The nice man next door to us wore sunglasses even indoors and carried a white hollow cane with him. He cried at night, although I don't know how he cried when he had no eyes beneath his sunglasses. Then there was the lonely woman who lived across from our apartment. Every evening she had a different soldier sleep over in her apartment. I think she threw a lot of slumber parties because people kept mentioning how many men she slept with. And then there was Baba Yaga, who lived down the hall. The stairs always made me sneeze. It always had dirt and dust brought in from the outside by everyone not bothering to wipe their feet. The building had an elevator, but it hadn't worked since before my parents were born. And since we lived on the top floor, that meant that every day we would have to travel down the stairs. And when we were done for the day, we would have to travel up all the stairs as well. All 7 floors, every day. When we left in the morning, every day, Baba Yaga had her broom in hand. An old wooden broom with old bristles, sweeping the dust and dirt on the top landing, pushing it down the stairs, collecting all of the dirt in the building down the stairs, floor by floor. She swept up the hallways, pushing it all towards the stairs, and then down the stairs, before pushing all of it out of the building through the front door. That meant that every morning Baba Yaga was on the top floor to watch me walk out, descending down the stairs. And every evening she was on the ground floor to watch me ascend the stairs. I don't like how she looked at all of the children of the building, like she was measuring the value of meat at the market, like she was trying to find the juiciest cut of beef that she could afford. And Baba Yaga was always the scariest when she was talking to the quiet man. The quiet man wore a blue uniform with a red and white oval patch on his left arm. As for the quiet man's face, I couldn't say. He never took off his mask, a reflective mask that covered his entire face, that I don't know how he ever saw through. He was always somewhere in the apartment block, usually peeking into people's grocery bags, into their apartments, through their windows, through their photo albums, their diaries, or even in their pockets. But no one seemed to talk to the quiet man, except for Baba Yaga and myself. Everyone always pretended he wasn't there at all, like the rest of the Civil Legion. One time when I wanted to ask my mom about the quiet man, I didn't get a chance to ask. I opened my mouth to ask, and I could see the quiet man peering at me over her shoulder. My mother tensed her shoulders with him standing so close, but she kept her eyes and hands focused on the shopping list in front of her, her hands shaking a little, her skin prickling, and her breath visible with him so close. But she didn't say anything, and she didn't look towards him, his head shaking no ever so slightly, and I knew that if I asked, he would just take me away like he did so many others. That was the worst part about the apartment block. Sometimes the quiet man just took people away. Sometimes the people went with the quiet man willingly, his rod in hand and their eyes downcast. No chains, no handcuffs, nothing holding them except the quiet man's presence. And then there was those who fought against the quiet man. Those who fought back or resisted were always beaten by him. Broken noses, black eyes, bleeding mouths, broken teeth, even broken arms and legs made by the quiet man's rod. And yet, every single person who fought against him always walked with him, with their heads held high, eyes shining with pride even if they were swollen shut, their backs straight even in agony, and their bleeding mouths smiling. The quiet man following close behind, but seemingly respectful of these prisoners. When someone was taken away by the quiet man, people always looked away. Even when the prisoners yelled, even when they fought, even when the quiet man beat his chosen victim against a wall and they fought back on shattered limbs, everyone always looked away. And when they were taken away, they were never spoken about again, except in hush whispers, and their tone made it very clear. Once taken away by the quiet man, you were never going to return. And as much as I hated the apartment block that I lived in, when I woke up in a room that looked just like the apartment that I was raised in, I immediately knew that it wasn't my home. I knew it wasn't my home because the quiet man was there, and I watched as he closed the door just before Nadya, lying next to me, woke up too. "Nadya, I think we need to leave," I told her. She rubbed her eyes as she yawned, peering around the apartment before she asked, "Where is Mom and Dad?" she asked, and I looked around as well. They were gone, and the apartment felt very empty. Now that I had a moment to think and examine the apartment, I could see there was a few things that were just a little off. Even though it was night, I could still see. There was soft light that shone from the dark corners of the room, making the room just bright enough to see. Then there was the smell. It smelled of sawdust and fresh cement, a smell that the apartment would never smell like. It didn't smell like anyone had lived here. There was no smell of candle, no smell of heated tuna, no sweet apple cider. No one had been here, and it seemed like we were the first people here. I think that they were taken away by the quiet man, I told her, pointing out to the door leading out of the apartment. As I pointed out to the apartment door, I could hear Mom's voice calling out, "Nadya, Valeska, help me!" Mom called out from the master bedroom. "It's Mom," Nadya said as she ran towards the voice. "Nadya, wait!" I called out. Something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was very wrong with the voice and the way our mom asked for help. Nadya didn't listen. She ran towards the bedroom door, slamming it open, and revealing that there was no bedroom inside. Instead, there was a stairwell leading down, 13 steps down to a landing, and 13 more steps from that landing. Dim light bulbs shining. "Mom, are you there?" Nadya yelled down the stairs, her voice echoing back for a moment. "Nadya, stop!" I told her, grabbing her arm before she crossed the threshold. 13 steps, a landing, then 13 more steps. The dim light bulbs, the stories from Mom and Dad. Let go of me, Valeska. I need to find Mom, she yelled as I grabbed her other arm and pulled her closer. Listen closely, I told her, holding a finger up to my lips, shushing us both, as I pointed down the steps. For a quiet and tense moment, there was silence for a long time until she realized it was silent. No one was calling for us anymore. It was a single call, and then it ended. Remember what they used to tell us about the stairs? I told her, and she thought about it before she nodded, and she answered, Always count the steps before you go down them. Don't go downstairs with 13 steps. You may never come back up again, she said as she counted the steps, as she counted them again. 13 steps down to the landing, and 13 steps down further into the darkness. What if it is actually Mom? She asked, and I asked her back. What did Mom tell us to ask if we are ever unsure? I reminded her, as she glanced down the steps, as she stopped shaking, and she instead remembered, and she called down the stairs. Does the black moon howl? She called, her voice echoing down the steps. When it reached the bottom, I could hear it echo as something mumbled from the bottom, too quiet for us to hear the words clearly. You need to answer the question, Nadya yelled down the stairs. A light mumble followed her words. It sounded a little like our mother, but a lot like something else. But now, Nadya no longer trusted the stairs, her hand on the doorknob. As long as you are aware, as long as you can speak, you are obligated to honestly answer the arch question. Such is the law of chaos. Does the black moon howl? Nadya called again, and now the voice spoke, sounding nothing like our mother, instead sounding like the walls themselves were vibrating. It was like the entire building chose to speak to us in that uncanny voice. Never where the magician performs, the voice said while we closed the door. Nadya was pale as a sheet, and I was as well. The door closed as we both nodded quietly. That was not our mother, and whatever was waiting at the bottom of the stairs was something very old and very powerful, something older and far more powerful than anything we encountered in the apartments we lived in. The apartment with the quiet man, Baba Yaga, and the many strange people in the apartments was like looking down a dark well to the water far down below. It was mysterious and even a little scary looking down it, but at least you can see the bottom to the well, and you know that as old as it was, that it was built by people. The voice on the bottom of the stairwell was like trying to peer into the bottom of Oceanus. It was far older than anything that I knew of, and I couldn't dream of what was on the bottom. But there was something on the bottom, and even though I couldn't see whatever it was, it could see me. Let's try the front door, I suggested, as Nadya agreed. We made our way to the door. While we walked towards the front door, we could hear our parents trying to call us back. Every step we took away from the stairwell, their voices got more desperate. I could hear hurt in their voices, screams like death, screams for help. The pain felt so real, and each step it only got louder. I reached for Nadya's hand. Her fingers are warm and familiar, and for a moment we can ignore the voices as we stand at the front door. At the door, with our hands resting on the wood, we can hear our parents. They no longer scream in pain. They tell us that they are burning in hell, and that they are waiting for us. They tell us that the flames stop hurting after a while. They tell us how the pain is the only thing keeping their bodies together. They tell us that we are the cause of all of their suffering. They tell us that if they leave us, that they will burn forever. My hand slid down to where the doorknob was. My fingers mere centimeters from the knob, when I could hear my mother's voice whispering mere centimeters from my ears. "If you leave this room, you will never see us again," she whispered. A distinct voice from the demonic voice is from the rest of the apartment. I paused before I grabbed the doorknob, before I turned to Nadya and she to me. We both heard the same words, and with a nod, I grabbed the door and I opened it. The door opened easily, and when the door opened, the voices stopped calling for us. When we stepped through, I could hear one last whisper in my mother's voice. "Goodbye, my children," she said, and when I stepped into the hallway, I turned to face the apartment we came from. But now it was no longer the familiar home we grew up in. Inside of it was a broken ruin. Wooden splinters and concrete dust filled what was left of the room. There was holes in the walls and ceiling, holes bigger than what was left of the walls. Where the dining table was, it was mostly intact. One leg was broken and it was still standing. And then there was 4 chairs left standing by the dining room table. 2 of the chairs are empty and covered in both cement and wood dust. The other 2 chairs had something still there. It reminded me of the butcher shop, but the meat wasn't hanging from a hook. It was slumped over in the seat. Blood pooled from the seats onto the floor, fading from crimson to brown. The meat still had skin in places, not enough to recognize what it once was. Bone was visible in some places, more yellow than I knew bone could be, with the pink sheen of blood and fluid coating the bones. I couldn't recognize what it used to be, based on the skin left. If it wasn't for the clothing left on the flesh, I would have thought it was something from the butcher shop. The door closed, and when I tried to open the door, it stayed shut. Not like it was locked, but like the door wasn't a door, but just a wall with a knob in it. Just like one of the doors to nowhere in the old city, created to trick the spirits and fae away from the actual doors that people use. "We can't go back, can we?" Nadya asked, and I could only shake my head. As certain as I was of the sun and the moon, I was certain that we couldn't go back into that room. When we left it for good. "We have to keep going," I told her as I turned down the hallway. An unfamiliar place with unfamiliar wallpaper. Actual wallpaper that wasn't peeling, wasn't stained, wasn't drawn on. And a rug red as blood and embroidered with gold. The lights were electric and looking like torches. The wallpaper was purple with red roses, green stems, and black thorns. A color so well painted and realistic that it looked like I could reach out and touch it. I reached out only to stop just shy of the roses. Nadya instead reached out and grabbed for the stem, only for her to hiss and pull back, her finger bleeding from where she touched the painted thorn. But with only one way to go, we traveled down the hallway, where we passed by other doors that were open just a crack, and we couldn't help but peek through. On the first door, when we peeked through, I could see a child's bedroom. A lump beneath the covers was a child hiding. The covers hiding the child's complete body. Even their eyes were covered while they hid beneath the covers. Shivering in fear beneath the blanket, folded at the foot of the bed was a military uniform, numerous medals, and an armband with Bathory's crest on it. Beneath the bed, we could see something staring at us. Something with sharp teeth and glowing eyes in the darkness. The next room was overgrown with thorns, thistles, tendrils, and vines that were sharp and deadly looking. In the center of the room was a mummified body, standing alone in a room with no furniture. Except, instead of being wrapped in gauze, like the old kings of Kemet, the body was wrapped in thorny vines. It didn't look like the vines were keeping it imprisoned, more like that the vines were the mummy's bandages. All of its body wrapped in vines and tendrils, except for a single bloodshot eye on the mummy's face. When it turned to face us, tendrils and vines broke over the mouth. Broken teeth and a dry tongue were visible, and a rotten scream that we could smell from the door erupted from its mouth. We quickly moved on. The next door was wide open. The room was covered in webs. A single light bulb on the ceiling was the only spot uncovered by the webs. And inside of the room was only one piece of furniture. We could see an empty throne. It was covered in cobwebs, too thick to see if the throne was wood or gold. On the floor of the room I could see more webs so thick that we couldn't see the floor, and far in the shadows we could see 8 reflective gems on the web-covered walls. Gems that seemed to be staring at us. We quickly left that door behind when we heard steps in the hallway. Quick and heavy steps. We turned to each other, and we both nodded silently as we both ducked, and we quickly moved without making noise, away from those steps. We knew those steps very well. The only people who could afford boots with steel toes was Bathory's Civil Legion. Most of the time, they were just standing around, bored, maybe escorting someone important. When they walked like that, though, like that they were marching to a beat that no one else could hear, they were looking for someone. And everyone knew that if the Civil Legion was looking for someone, and if they found you instead, they may take you instead. It could be for any reason at all. Making eye contact, avoiding eye contact, too dirty, too clean, too fast, too slow, too loud, too quiet, too young, too old, too ugly, too pretty. Could be any reason at all, or no reason at all, and all you could do was hide away from the Civil Legion and hope that the person they take away isn't you. The hallway had turns we could make, and we continued moving as quickly as we could in silence. But still, the steps were getting closer and closer. I turned to Nadya, and we could see in our expressions what we had to do. We couldn't run away from the officer. We could only hide. We peeked through the doors as we ran by, trying to judge which ones were safe to hide in, and which ones were as dangerous as our stalker. One room we saw had someone held in both chains and hooks, their skin peeled away from their flesh and bone. The noises they were making weren't screams nor moans of pain. Another door we peeked through had a bunch of children huddled around a single candle. Their eyes were as black as leather and all focused on the candle's flame. When I finally came to a door, where someone was focused on playing cards in front of them. I turned to Nadya and nodded towards the door I was facing, while Nadya shook her head and she entered the door across from me. We weren't going to hide together, because when we hide together, we are more likely to be caught. If we hide separately, then if one of us gets caught, then the other could escape. Something we learned from playing hide and seek over the years, but also something we learned from hiding from the Civil Legion. When everyone hides in the same place, all it takes is one person getting caught to mean that everyone got caught. So while I hid in the room with the figure reading the cards, Nadya hid across from me. I carefully ducked behind the door, so even if they peered inside, like I had been doing, that I wouldn't be seen, keeping the door cracked open, because as tempting as it was to close the door to feel safer, I knew that if all of the doors were cracked open, and suddenly one door was closed, then it would look more suspicious to the officer, not less suspicious. I listened to the steps approach, closer and closer. I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing quietly and being so careful to not touch the door. Years of experience in hiding came through in that moment as I stood still and the steps approached. When the officer was just outside of the room, I could see the door vibrate in its hinges. But the officer continued down their patrol without hesitating nor slowing. The steps grew further and further distant until finally they faded away into nothing. Then I started breathing normally when I turned back to the table where I could see the woman staring at her cards. She didn't notice me. She only focused on her cards, which looked blank where I was, but I couldn't help myself as I asked, "Do you need help leaving?" I asked her. She shook her head as she shuffled her 3 cards and she played them again, looking at her cards. No, I can't leave this place. Not until I have an answer for my future that I like," she said as she shuffled her cards again. The same 3 cards as she played them out again. Maybe in the same order as before, and maybe in a different order, but they all looked the same, so I couldn't tell if there was any difference. Why? I don't like that future either. I need something different before I can leave," she said as she shuffled her cards yet again. And I stepped closer to a table, a short card table, while she sat on the floor, looking over the blank cards. "If you don't like what the cards say, why don't you leave them and come out?" I asked her as she finally looked up at me. Her red sunken eyes stared into my eyes. She clearly hadn't slept in a long time, and I don't think she had thought about anything but her own future. "The cards tell the future. I can't leave unless there's a good future for me, but every time I ask them for the future, it always ends the same way, every time," she said as she shuffled again, and she laid her cards down as she yelled again, slamming her hands on the table. Same. Why is it always the same? It shouldn't be doing that," she said as I spoke up again. "If your future is always the same when you stay in here, do you think leaving the room might change your future?" I asked her as she glanced up at me before she sighed and focused on the cards again. "You're a child, so you don't know better, but if you knew how your future ended, you would stay here until it changed too," she said while shuffling her cards. And at first, I thought I would ask her how my future would end. But then I remembered what my father said in his story, and I looked back at the woman, shuffling her same 3 cards, hoping that they would show her a different future, never making any choices, and always hoping that things would get better without her making any choices. A hope without a will, a change without determination. I stepped to the door as I turned to the woman, and I called out, "I'll leave the door open so that you can leave when you want to," I told her. She focused on her cards, not looking up at me. I stepped into the hallway where I saw Nadya, also exiting her room, and leaving the door open just a crack. "What was in your room?" I asked Nadya. "There was a man who kept trying to rewrite history by removing pages from a book, and then writing different pages to try and sew his pages into the book. But there was always more pages he needed to remove, always more of the past that needed to be expunged before he could replace them with his own pages. His pile of removed pages was taller than he was, and the pages he wrote was blank, not even started." "What was in your room?" "There was a woman who kept seeing the future in her cards. She refused to leave her room nor make any choices because she didn't like how her future ended. So she kept shuffling the same 3 cards over and over, hoping that the cards would tell her a different future, so that way she could finally leave. Too afraid of the future to see the present. After that, we turned where the officer came from as we wandered down the hallway, turning the corner and making our way to where we thought the exit may be. We had no reason to assume it was the way out, but it felt like the way out. It felt like the place that our parents may have been taken down. As the doors grew further and further apart in the hallway, we continued down the hallway where we could see a big, grand door. It was like something out of an old history book. 3 concentric circles that showed different worlds, all connected by a single tree. Upper world had clouds and palaces, where the branches of the tree were. Middle world showed mountains, cities, and people, where the trunk of the tree was. And then, in the center, was lower world, where there was fire and a throne, one that resembled the one room we saw. This was where the roots of the tree were at. Felso, Kosepso, also, all connected by Vilakfa, Nadya said as she touched the door, and the door opened, light beyond the house as we exited the pumpkin house together. Valeska never had the stomach to visit Dad at work. He didn't like the smell of blood, bowels, and boils. Every form of injury that could exist existed in the hospital tents. Even all these kilometers from the front, there was still injured soldiers and still people who needed medical attention. The tents always smelled. The smell of antiseptic, blood, illness, vomit, shit, urine, and sweat. In the tents, Valeska was always scared to go inside. At first, I thought it was because he was scared of the injured soldiers. Soldiers with exposed organs, muscle, and bone, to the air while surgeons desperately tried to remove metal shrapnel and sewing together the skin. Medics dabbing at the blood, pus, and shit, trying to keep it from drowning the organs. Grown men, women, and adults with pain barely numbed, staring at the ceiling, desperate not to look down, singing desperate songs or chatting with someone else, trying not to think about what was happening to their own body, just behind the thin sheet keeping them from seeing their own surgery. Or then there was those who hadn't been treated yet. The grown soldiers who were meant to be the strongest and most dangerous people in the nation, who screamed and cried like babies from their injuries. Bloody clothes obscuring their injuries, but not completely keeping the wound from the light of day. And as scary as the screamers were, they were nothing compared to those in shell shock. A woman who was screaming at the surgeons to save her baby while they were pulling out shrapnel and placenta out of her belly was loud and scary to make eye contact with, but at least she still had life and a fight inside of her. She had a chance of surviving and could escape fates worse than death. There were many different types of shell shock. Those who would start crying at the sound of a dropped scalpel, those who would be stuck in a dead-eye stare, and those who didn't respond to any input. Some didn't flinch when pricked. Some wouldn't drink unless the glass was placed up to their lips, and others would die of thirst or starvation without medical help. I had delivered fresh towels to Dad when he performed surgery on someone with shell shock. Even without ether or whiskey, he stayed still while he was cut open and sewed back together to remove his gallstones. Father explained to me it wasn't that they didn't feel pain, it was that their bodies had been in so much pain and danger that it didn't know how to react anymore. A fight-or-flight instinct doesn't help when you're hiding in a trench, unable to run away, unable to fight back. When you are in the fight so long that your body and mind simply can't comprehend being away from the fight. It was these patients that I was asked to help with. The nurses, medics, doctors, and surgeons were scared to be in the same room as them. I think looking at the statue-still patients made them feel how vulnerable their lives truly were. That if the strongest people could be reduced to crying children or petrified statues, then so could they. I would have to feed them, give them water, clear away their bedpans, change blankets when possible, and my most important job was to sing to them or read them stories. Father had a copy of children's and household tales written by the Grimm brothers that I could read. I could also make up my own stories. Stories about snakes in the sky, of fish learning to build tunnels underground, tales of trees that would reach above the clouds. It helped at least some of the shell-shocked patients into being able to care for themselves, which would mean that their lives would be spared when the Civil Legion visited on this every second Saturday of the month. The Great War had stretched many resources very thin. Marcomannia barely had resources for the soldiers and citizens who were productive for the war, and Bathory had already declared any that were unable or unwilling to contribute to the war effort could be imprisoned, executed, or harvested, all depending on the state the shell-shocked soldiers were in, would dictate their fate. A fate that Father tried to hide from me, but fates that I still heard from the hushed whispers. The luckiest ones, the ones with wealthy or well-connected families, were sent to the asylums, where they may get help, or where they were forgotten. But at least they would be fed, clothed, and sheltered, without having to worry about the war anymore. The unlucky ones, the ones who could still be a little productive, but had no one strong enough to protect them, were sent to the prisons, where they would grow food, assemble bullets, or do other dangerous jobs that were still needed for the war effort. They often didn't live long, and those that did had their shell shock worsen. Those who had nothing productive left to offer, who were said to be useless to the government, but were lucky enough to have their organs or flesh too damaged or infected to be used, would be executed, their blood simply drawn from their bodies and taken away from the Civil Legion, off to Bathory in her castle. Their bodies thrown into a communal grave that would be covered and unmarked, their remaining relatives never knowing what happened to them. The least lucky of the shell-shocked, those who wouldn't react, but who still had healthy skin, healthy organs, they had one last service to their country before execution. Marcomannia had many lost sons and daughters in the front. Those left behind in the home weren't having children quickly enough to replace those that were lost. They just weren't, and no amount of tax credits or slight increases in rations was changing people's minds. Unfortunately, Bathory had an elegant solution to this several decades ago. Men and women don't need functioning minds to have children. They just needed functioning organs, functioning loins, and Bathory's midwives could simply take care of the rest. I don't know the exact process they used, but Father whispered about how recently the midwives could harvest semen from men who had been dead for several hours, as long as the genitals were intact, and how they could harvest eggs from dead women as long as they died within the hour and the uterus was intact. And when the men and women who were harvested could no longer be used to produce more children of Markomania, they were drained of their blood, their skin, and organs taken to be given to the wounded, regardless of their wishes in life. And whatever couldn't be used was dumped into a pit to be burned, not even ashes given to any mourners. Entire generations of children, conceived by parents that didn't know they had conceived children. Entire generations of children harvested for their country. So when I was asked to read and sing, I read and I sang. No matter how eerie it felt, no matter how creepy their stares at me felt, I knew that in my heart that if I didn't try to help them, that no one was going to help them, and that they were going to be doomed to terrible fates. Valeska could never visit this place. The pain and hurt always hurt him too much to be around. He said being around the sick and the hurt made him feel both sick and hurt. So he usually spent his time in the market with Mother. As we traveled through the dark tunnel that was outside of the door, I could smell the familiar smell of antiseptic, blood, suffering, and infection. A familiar smell that I knew well. When I turned to Valeska, his scrunched up face showed that he hated the smell, but he couldn't hold his nose with one hand in my hand and the other on the wall. My left hand on the left wall, and my right hand in Valeska's left hand as we finally stepped into the light, and we saw the newest haunt and the proof that it was the pumpkin house that we were in. The space we were in resembled the field hospital, but like it was from a nightmare. Every bed was full of patients, and the patients were all in terrible shape. Their bandages were barely covering their wounds, and full of blood to the point it was useless to keep the patients safe. The exposed wounds to the air were pulsing and bleeding to the floor. The floors were filthy with blood, organs, and flesh. And the worst part was the patients. The patients were silent. I saw a grown man with a missing eye with no bandage protecting the socket. A dark hole inside of his skull open to the air and the world. His remaining eye stared into the distance, not because he was free of pain, but because his body had given up on responding to pain a long time ago. Valeska saw the patients and he focused his eyes on his feet, not wanting to look towards the patients. "This isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right," he said, and he kept saying as I approached the patient closest to me. I wanted to reach out and hold him, but seeing how bad his wounds were and how poorly he was treated, I could only have one thought in my heart as I saw him and all of the other patients in the hospital. "He's already dead," I said, stopping just short of the patient, his eye still not responding to me. I had seen death in the hospital before, just as Valeska had seen death in the apartment, and those deaths were very different types of deaths The man I was looking at wasn't technically dead. He was still breathing, his heart was still pumping, but there was nothing that could be done to stop his death. The wounds would turn septic if they didn't already. His blood would become poison, and even if by some miracle he survived all of that without medical intervention, then he would be killed by the Civil Legion. The little red tag on his IV bag confirmed it. A do not treat tag. I remember that being something that Dad explained to me a few times while Valeska slept. Some patients aren't dead when they ask for help, but there is nothing that can be done, so they are marked by the do not treat tag to avoid wasting precious resources on a patient that wouldn't recover. I looked over all the beds with all of the patients. All of them had the red do not treat tags. "I'm so sorry," I said as I turned from him, and I went back to Valeska. He was scared because he was scared of the patients. I was scared because I was scared for them. They weren't even given company in their last moments. What kind of cruel doctors or nurses would do that? The voice came first, soft, familiar.
"Do I hear that I have 2 more patients?"
My heart skipped for a moment. The fear inside me cracked open and light poured in. I knew that voice. I knew it. "Father," I called, my voice raw from the rot, stinking air. He stepped from behind the curtain, and at first I was sure it was him. The same tall frame, the same frayed cuffs, the same lenses smeared with fingerprints. He looked tired, yes, but Father was always tired. His hands hung low and careful, the way surgeons hold their hands when they've scrubbed in. And yet, something was wrong. The light from the surgical lamps flickered against his skin, and each flicker changed him slightly. His eyes too round, his teeth too white, the smile stretched a heartbeat too long. Each time the light blinked, it was like his face had been redrawn by someone who had seen my father once and was trying to remember him. The smell of antiseptic swelled, sour and chemical, burning the back of my throat. Underneath it, the metallic tang of blood never faded. It mixed with the stink of wet bandages, the dampness of bodies left too long without air. My lungs burned when I breathed. Valeska's hand tightened in mine. His breathing was ragged, shallow. "That's not him," he said softly. "Don't be silly," I whispered. "He's right there." But Valeska wasn't looking at the doctor. He was looking around him. His pupils had gone wide, swallowing nearly all the color. He's got people behind him," Valeska whispered. "They're inside his shadow. They're moving." I saw nothing. Only Father, or whoever he was, smiling at me, voice low and gentle.
"You've done such good work here, Nadya. You've helped the wounded. But you look pale, my dear. Come, let me take care of you now."
Something broke in me then. Relief. Gratitude. I wanted to believe. I needed to. After everything, the smell, the screaming, the endless red-tagged beds, I wanted someone to tell me it was all right. He reached out his hand. It was steady, sure, and cold. The skin on his knuckles looked stretched too tight, shiny, almost translucent. When his fingers brushed my shoulder, I felt the kiss of metal, so quick I almost didn't notice. Then came the sting, The prick of a needle. I gasped. Father?
That's it. Good.
He said, and for the first time I heard something underneath his voice. A faint hum, like flies behind a curtain.
It's only medicine to calm your nerves, my dear.
The liquid rushed through me, ice water in my veins. My heart clenched, then stuttered. Valeska screamed. I turned toward him and froze. The doctor's skin was peeling at the edges. His left cheek sagged, showing a sliver of dark flesh underneath, as though a wax figure were melting in slow motion. The shadows clung to him like wet cloth. From them stepped figures, nurses in torn uniforms, mouths sewn shut with thick black thread. The stitches wriggled when they breathed.
Prepare the beds,
He said, voice different now, no longer the voice of a father caring for his child, but the indifference of a doctor speaking about a patient.
2 new patients. Non-responsive.
My vision wavered. I could taste copper in the back of my mouth. The air buzzed like flies swarming over meat. We ran. The corridor was endless, walls made of stitched canvas and rusted metal poles. The lamps above swung gently, dripping wax or oil or something that wasn't either. To me, it looked like a field hospital in collapse. Bodies on cots, leaking fluids. The bandages, gray and slick. Flies thick enough to blur the air. The floor was a paste of blood, mud, and antiseptic powder that crunched like ground bone. To Valeska, it was worse. I could see in his face, in his eyes, what it was he saw. He saw the souls, pale and shriveled, crawling half out of their bodies, mouths yawning open without sound. One soldier had no head at all, yet whispered prayers through the hole in his throat. Another clutched his own heart in his hands, still beating faintly, weeping over it like a dead child. He shouted things I didn't understand. Names, numbers, warnings. But all I heard was the sound of blood dripping. Drip, drip, drip. Too rhythmic, too constant. It wasn't dripping. It was ticking. Tick, tick, tick. We turned a corner. A patient sat upright, eyes staring at the ceiling. A red tag dangled from his IV line. Do not treat. He didn't blink, didn't breathe right. When I passed him, his head turned, bones cracking. You'll be one of us, he whispered. His voice sounded like air escaping a corpse. His hand snapped forward and caught my wrist. The flesh was cold and slick. When I tore free, his fingernails sliced me open. My blood mixed with his. The smell, oh gods, the smell. Iron, ozone, and rot. Like the moment after lightning, when the world was burnt. Valeska pulled me onward, panting. They're following us, he said. The ones in the beds. They're watching. I looked back, and he was right. Every patient had turned their head in perfect unison. 100 pairs of dead eyes tracking us through the dim light. No, not tracking us. just tracking me, tracking the one who was full of that strange syringe that was slowing down both my body and mind. We found an empty row lined with red tags. The air was still here. No nurses, no movement, only the quiet hum of oil lamps and the soft flutter of dying flies. My heart and breath slowing as I looked up and down the row, the bloody beds looking more and more tempting for me to rest on as the drugs made me more and more exhausted. They don't look here, I said, voice shaking. They've given up on these ones. They won't see us if we stay. We crawled under one of the beds, both of us fitting beneath the bed. The floor was sticky. Something soft brushed my cheek. A finger or a strip of skin. The stench was thick enough to chew. Valeska pressed his ear to the ground, his eyes unfocused. They're counting, he whispered. Under the floor. They're counting us down. Stop it, I hissed, trembling. Please, stop. They're saying our names, he said. Nadya, Valeska, 23 and 24. The lamps above flickered again. The light pulsed like a heartbeat. Then came the footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate, and the humming, low, tuneless, motherly. The nurses emerged from the haze, faces veiled in gauze, soaked red at the mouth. Their hands gleamed white, holding trays of needles and bone saws. One leaned close to our bed. Her breath smelled of bile and perfume. Such a pity, she said sweetly. Too weak to survive. Another replied, voice muffled through cloth. Not worth harvest. No blood, no milk, no marrow. Waste. I tried to scream, but my throat wouldn't move. My jaw locked, my limbs heavy. Another needle stabbed into both of our arms. Our bodies paralyzed. They lifted us with practiced care, sliding cold hands beneath our necks and knees, placing us on the beds marked with the red tags. The sheets around us were damp, slippery. When I glanced down, I saw my own braid trailing over the stretcher, and beside me, Valeska's hands, limp and pale, already folded over his chest. We were being carried, and we were watching it happen. The doors at the end of the hall opened with a sigh. The cold air spilled in, thick with the smell of wet soil and decay. The crooked cemetery waited outside, rows of half-dug graves and tilted markers, all glistening with rain and blood. The sky above was the color of clotted wine. They hummed as they carried us, the song rising and falling like a lullaby for the damned. Sleep, little children, the harvest is done. The doctor is proud of the work you've become. They laid us in the pit, soft, sinking into the mud. I felt the dirt fall, warm and sticky. Valeska's hand found mine, weak but alive. Are we dead? I whispered. He looked at me, tears cutting through the grime on his face. No, he said, but they think we are. As the soil closed over us, I could hear the beeping again. Not machines, not hearts, just the slow, patient ticking of something counting us down. The shovels didn't clang against stone. They hissed. Each scoop of earth slid down like wet tongues, packing tight around our bodies. The dirt was hot, wrongly hot, steaming from beneath, and when it touched my breath, it burned like fevered breath. Above us, the nurses moved in a circle, their gauze faces glowing pale in the dusk. I could see them through the thin film of mud over my lashes, white shapes swaying, hands linked by veins instead of cloth, needles gleaming at the ends of their fingers. Their humming grew louder, blending with the wind and the faint chime of glass instruments somewhere far inside the hospital. Valeska's hand squeezed mine once more, then again, slower. His lips moved, barely. "They're praying," he whispered. I couldn't breathe without swallowing mud. The taste was iron and ash, as if the ground itself had been steeped in blood. Every breath scraped my throat raw. "They think we're dead?" I whispered. Valeska shook his head, eyes wide. "They know we're not. They're waiting for us to stop." The humming changed. The nurses began to count, not in numbers, but in tones, long, droning notes that rose and fell like bellows. On every fourth note, they thrust their hands downward, and I felt the vibration through the soil, a tremor that made my bones itch. Valeska stiffened. His pupils rolled back, showing white. "They're calling the souls up," he said. "The ones under us, they're pushing them through." I didn't want to hear. I didn't want to see. But the soil began to move. Something beneath us shifted, soft, then firmer. Fingers that weren't ours. They slid through the mud, brushing against my calves, my spine, my hair. I screamed without sound, my mouth filling with grit. Valeska convulsed. "They're angry," he choked. "They think we stole their graves." The air inside the pit turned thick. It wasn't air anymore. It was vapor, chemical and sour, rising from the ground like breath from an open wound. My flesh crawled as it soaked through my clothes, the smell of ether and rotting lilies clinging to every pore. Above us, the nurses leaned closer. Their humming became words now, low and syrupy. "We mend the flesh, we bleed the clay, 2 for marrow, none for day." One nurse lifted a lantern. The light spilled down in yellow ribbons, catching the slick threads of worms and bits of bone that wriggled through the soil. She tilted her head as if studying a patient. The gauze over her mouth bulged outward, then split. A dark fluid poured through the seams and dripped onto my cheek. It was warm, sweet, copper and sugar. My stomach lurched. Valeska began to laugh, a broken, frightened laugh that sounded like sobbing. "They think it's baptism," he said. "They're washing us into the earth." I tried to move, to claw upward, but the mud clung to me like a second skin. Each time I exhaled, the dirt closed tighter. I could feel my ribs creak. My vision tunneled until all that remained was the pulse of the lantern above. A single bleeding sun. Valeska whispered something. Maybe my name, but the dirt muffled it. When I turned toward him, his face was half buried, lips blue, eyes open. He was staring at something past me, into the soil itself. "What is it?" I tried to ask, though I wasn't sure if any sound came out. "They're smiling," he said. "All of them beneath us. They're smiling because they remember." Then his head dropped forward, and for one perfect moment, the world was silent except for the rhythm of the nurses' chant. Their voices rose like wind through hollow throats. "One for the doctor, one for the womb. Sleep now, children, make more room." The soil began to breathe. Each inhale pulled us deeper. Each exhale rattled our bones. I felt the pressure on my chest ease, just enough to gasp, and the air that entered smelled of hospitals and graveyards, a mother's perfume from years ago. I wanted to cry, I wanted to pray, but my mind was slipping, the edges of thought dissolving like sugar in tea. And then a sound, faint, mechanical, beeping. It came from the earth below, slow and patient, a heartbeat that wasn't ours. The nurses stopped singing. One tilted her head, listening. Her lantern swung once, and the light passed over her face. There was nothing beneath the gauze. No mouth, no jaw, only black hollows dripping that same sweet fluid. She whispered, almost kindly, "Vitals stable. Bury them deeper." Shovels again. Weight dark. The last thing I felt was Valeska's fingers brush mine, still warm, and the faint tremor of something alive moving in the soil beside us. Something breathing with us. Something waiting. And then the world went quiet. Only the smell of antiseptic, only the taste of blood and dirt, only the hum of 1,000 flies whispering under the ground. The lullaby returned, distant now, fading like memory. "Sleep, little children, the harvest is done. The doctor is proud of the work you've become." Then nothing. Only the slow, patient ticking beneath the soil, counting down. The cemetery was always my favorite part of the city. It was quiet. The Civil Legion rarely went inside, and it was peaceful. There was always people in the cemetery. Most people couldn't see them, but Mother could, and she always had me play with the children while she spoke with the adults who stayed in the cemetery. It was always fun to play with the children, but Mother always gave me rules to follow. Don't fall into the open graves. Only play with children who ask to be played with. Stay away from the graves that were hot. Do not disturb the women who worked in the mausoleums. And of course, don't bother the people who were crying. The cemetery was a favorite place to visit. It was the only place in the city where I could find people that were happy. The only place that felt peaceful. The Crooked Cemetery was nothing like that, especially when I was buried alive alongside Nadya. The soil settled over us both. I could feel Nadia's hand in my own hand. The air was getting thin and full of dirt. I could feel the troubled steps of the nurses, no longer the steady rhythm that they had for us when they carried us out. It was quick and urgent, like they were running from something. That was heaven compared to what was in the soil beneath us. I could feel them crawling, squirming, enduring, and moving. Something that was still for a very long time, that was now beginning to warm and remember that it could move. All I could do was hope that staying still would keep it from waking up. But even with the weight of the earth weighing me down like a blanket, and with the drugs in my system, my heart still beat, my lungs still breathed with difficulty, my fingers moved a little. It disturbed what was beneath us as they began to stir, their voices echoing through my head and through the dirt. "Something new has joined us in the graveyard," the voice hissed. Then it spoke again from somewhere else. "Something with lungs that breathes," the voice behind my ear said. "Something with a heart that beats," the voice said beneath my feet. "Something with a mouth that eats," the voice beneath my chest rumbled, causing the bones in my chest to vibrate as I gripped my sister's hand tighter, the only way I could move. "Oh, it isn't just one, it's two," the voice near my ear whispered. "Two? It's so rare to find one true heart in my realm. Two is unheard of," the voice beneath my feet said with excitement. "Two true hearts. It would be cruel for us to keep them apart," the voice beneath my chest rumbled. I could feel it moving towards Nadya, but I couldn't let them reach her. "Stop," I said with all the strength I could muster. It came out as a weak whisper that filled my mouth with mud and stole more of my breath away. But the slithering voices stopped moving towards Nadya, and instead started moving towards me again. I could hear the bodies that the voices came from slithering around me, like three snakes connected as it wrapped around my body. Only a thin layer of dirt separated the beasts of the crooked cemetery from my skin. No, not beast, beast. A beast with multiple heads, multiple voices, multiple maws, multiple minds. But as they focused on me, I could hear something above us on the surface of the grave, moving on our shallow graves. Something that the beast didn't notice. A lot of little feet, a lot of little claws, little sparks above us through the darkness. Little feet that drowned out the beeping that I could hear reverberating through the soil. "Stop. The little thing thinks it can tell us to stop. What power does this child have over us?" "None. No power. We could do nothing, and we could leave you, and you will still die. Die, die, die. You would be slowly suffocated and crushed, your metabolism slowed by the crushing cold. We can let you wait. The worms will crawl in before you die. Little heart, who are you to protect another little heart?" I realized then the voices had no idea who Nadya and I were. They still didn't realize what was above us. As they got closer, I could see more of the sparks. Hope, rebirth, warmth. The candlelight next to your bed while you were waking from a nightmare. But I was still in the grips of the nightmare, and I would have to face the nightmare. I struggled to lift my left hand to cover my mouth as I spoke. A little bit of air, but protection for my mouth so I could speak. "Who am I? I am Valeska Aaron, twin brother of Nadya Aaron, son of Branwyn Aaron and Morana Aaron. You will stop trying to scare us. You will let us go. You will be a good host. You will not transgress, because they are coming, I told the beast. My voice echoed with more strength through the dirt, and judging by the squeeze I could feel from Nadia's hand, she could hear, or at least feel, my words. The voices squirmed as they dug away from my body, and for the first time I could hear dread in the creature's voice. I knew deep in my heart, from the same place, that told me that hope was above us in the soil. A son and daughter of Morana? What are they doing in my domain? Do we dare anger a goddess of rebirth and death? The first voice mused. Hell and hope, hope and hell, hell and hope, hope and hell. The second voice repeated again and again, even as the other voices spoke. The boy's a liar. He has to be a liar. No one like him would ever fall beneath the dirt. And even if they did, Morana's laws are clear. They are ours. Neither Branwyn nor Morana would intervene, not even for their own children, the final voice said, which quieted the other voices for a moment. I spoke again. I am not lying, but you misunderstood what I said. I didn't say Morana and Branwyn were coming. I said that they were coming, I said, squeezing Nadia's hand. By now I could hear them above me with my ears, and not through the esoteric senses. The sound of claws hitting stone, the sound of scratching through soil, the sound of intent above both Nadia and myself. Who is coming? All are welcome to my domain. More true hearts to feed my never-ending hunger. The small ones are coming. The forgotten ones are coming. The singers in the silence are coming, I said as the beast recoiled. Her? Why is she here? It isn't fair. We cannot transgress if there's no harbinger. It is her rule. He is lying. He is lying. Their hearts belong to us, the voices said, doubting every single word they said. A harbinger? You mean like the twin children of Branwyn and Morana telling you that you will stop? I said as their dread and doubt became horror, and the beast stopped moving. Now hidden in the soil, the beast was the one who lived beneath the grave, as Nadia and I focused on what was digging into the grave from above. The scent changed. It was no longer ether, rot, mud, and ash. It now smelled of fur, rain, and evening air. Slivers of light came in above us as whatever scared away the beast beneath us finally made its way to us. The dirt moved enough that I could finally see what fearsome creatures freed us from being buried alive. The soil free from my eyes, I could see the eyes of my savior, and I could see mostly black eyes shining in the dark. It was less than half a meter long. It had 4 legs covered in fur, with the only visible pink skin inside of its ears. Little horns on a little head with long ears. Fur covered the body as the little feet with little claws dug into the soil. The furry face reached out to me as the nose touched my nose, like the horned rabbit was telling me to breathe. I took a deep breath after the rabbit's nose touched my own, and with the deep breath, the beeping faded away again. The last of the paralysis faded from me as I pulled myself up out of the dirt, and Nadia followed suit. The soil on top of our bodies wasn't as deep as I thought it was, but we were still dumped into a pit that was at least 2 meters deep. We could see the roots of the ground reach deep, but not deep enough for us to pull ourselves out. On the edge of the grave above, I could see a girl shrouded in darkness. I could see the red and yellow of her dress, the bells and ribbons of her hat, as she reached both arms into the pit, reaching down for us to grab her hand.
Take my hand. I can only reach down for you when you reach up for me.
She said in a tone that sounds almost like she was singing a song behind her words. We reached out to her hand. Somehow her hand was within easy reach, but when we looked at her, her arms weren't extra long. She wasn't bigger than a normal girl, but somehow her hands were right where we could grab. A contradiction, but I couldn't see through, nor could I understand. Not in an exoteric nor esoteric way. Divinity, I whispered to Nadya, who nodded in agreement, and we both grabbed the girl's hands as she pulled us out of the pit onto the grass next to the grave. While we caught our breaths next to the girl, she wiped off the dirt onto her apron. After she wiped her hand on the apron, she placed a hand on her hips, looking down at us like an older sister. The way she smiled at us felt familiar. Something from my oldest memory, a memory so old that I was told it was a dream. Baba Yaga and Mom told us both that the memory wasn't a memory, that it was a dream, that it had to be a dream. I remember playing with an older sister who always watched us when we were alone, a warmth guiding us away from the Civil Legion, a tap on the shoulder showing us what it was we were looking for, a kind thought on the worst days, a voice to read us a story when the sirens screamed outside, a hand pulling down the book from the high shelf, a memory that we were told was a dream, and for a long time I believed it, until I saw her again.
Breathe. Breathe until you remember you're alive.
She murmured, and we inhaled deeply. Air burned every part of my chest, but it was ours, free of soil, free of pain, free of the grave. We were alive. The jackalopes ran around her, their feet and scratching on the dirt and stone, a soothing lullaby to the beast that hid beneath the cemetery, placing it back into a deep sleep. The lullaby brought the memory of her name back. Adansi, you're the ruler of the pumpkin house? I asked her, and she turned to face me. She moved strangely. I was used to seeing strange things that no one else could see. The pain that places could feel, the colors of people's voices, the taste of their emotions. The quiet man. But Adansi was like none of them. The way she moved wasn't like an object in motion. It was like clay being reshaped to make her appear like she is moving, while in reality she is simply changing shape, shaped by her own invisible hands.
You were buried too soon. It's a shame. People are usually dying to get to their graves. But do not fear, little brother and little sister. The soil hasn't forgotten you yet.
Her words didn't sound special to my ears, but every fiber of my heart and soul shivered at her words like she was a thunderstorm. The horned rabbits around us paused in their service for a moment and bowed their heads. And in that moment, I didn't see jackalopes nor horned rabbits. I saw children. I saw lost children who never made their way home. I saw children who never had a home to lose. I saw children who had to grow up too quickly. I saw children who never had a chance to grow up. All where the rabbits were just a moment ago, before they became rabbits again, hopping into the darkness of the gravestones, disappearing from view. "What are you?" Nadya asked Adansi, who tilted her head like the question was strange.
Your sister, your friend, your hero, your madness, your obstacle, your harbinger.
She reached out her hand and lifted my face up to see her face. I could see that her eyes could see a lot too. Far more than I could ever hope to see. And she wasn't afraid of what she was seeing. She saw beauty in all of it, not danger.
Little brother, if you want to see more, and you want more to see, you need to find beauty in the frightful. And you need to find the fright in the beautiful.
she said as she turned to Nadya.
Little sister, the world is far more than you know. There's colors that you've never seen. There's songs you've never heard. There's scents you've never smelled. There's food you've never tasted. There's bunnies you've never pet. And you never will if you always avoid the road less traveled.
Adansi said as she turned to the distance. In the distance, we could hear the ringing of bells. Bells that chimed for us and for so many others. Above us, the sky was violet, with no stars, only the clouds above drifting down like ash and obscuring the distance in the cemetery. Something changed behind Adansi's eyes. No longer the compassionate eyes of a rabbit, replaced instead with the mad eyes of a March hare.
The house is not done with you yet. Try not to wake the many-headed hydra that rests beneath the graves. Follow the roots where the soil rings true. Be cautious how you travel. The ground is thin here. As thin as the line between life and death.
She sighed as she looked out over the crooked cemetery, looking forlorn, before she focused on us again, her tears falling down to the ground, creating puddles around her feet that reflected the sky above. Puddles far larger than the tears that were falling.
I will leave clues for you to find. Clues that cannot be hidden nor altered by others. That doesn't mean that it will be easy to understand, nor does it mean that others won't place false clues to mislead you. Reach the skeleton, and you may leave the crooked cemetery to reach the farthest grounds of the pumpkin house to help me,
she said with a smile. Her tears now shed, I could see sparks behind her eyes again. No, not sparks. Lightning. Help you? Help you with what? Nadya asked, her voice hesitant. What could a being as powerful as the Marquess of Madness possibly need from human beings like us? I could see her asking in her eyes. It was strange because the answer was obvious to me, without Adansi ever needing to say a single word. Adansi cast her eyes to Nadya as she took off her hat, and she brushed it off like she was trying to figure out how to answer Nadia's question. It was a question she never expected to be asked. But here it was, and now Adansi was finding her patience to answer Nadia's question. But she took a deep inhale, and she placed a hand on both of our shoulders. A hand that was neither warm nor cold, but it held the memory of both. If my hands could hold a spark, then her fingertips held stars. How many dying hands did she hold on the deathbed? How many exhausted hands did she hold during labor? How many newborns' hands did she hold? How many hands was she the first to hold? How many hands was she the last to hold? In that moment, with her hand on my shoulder, if you told me all of them, I would have believed you.
Why, I need your help in setting up the party! You silly goat! Are you feeling quite bad today?
Adansi said, and in an instant she was gone. No movement, no step, no wind. Just absence. And the memory of a hand on my shoulder. A memory of a dream. And with her gone, now it no longer felt like she was real, but also like she was the only real thing in our life. Nadya swayed next to me, shaking her head as she spoke. Adansi saved us? She asked incredulously as I shook my head. She wasn't saving us. She was planting us somewhere else. We have to save ourselves, I said as I could feel the movement beneath the soil again, like the worms were moving beneath us, squirming, wiggling, and searching. We have to move, Nadya said as she grabbed my hand, and we stepped away from the grave that we were pulled out of. Our bodies clean, but I could still feel the blood, dirt, and ether on my skin. the memory of the touch that didn't shake nearly as easily as the actual dirt. Around the cemetery, we could see crooked lines of gravestones, crooked paths of stone, and even footpaths through the cemetery. The fog in the distance made it impossible to know which way, if any, lead to the exit. Dad always said that the cemetery was leading on the outside heading in, but now we are heading from the inside out, so we should try away from the path that brought us here, Nadya suggested, pointing at the muddy trail that went right into the fog and along the smooth paved stones. Yeah, that's a good idea, but that just tells us one possible wrong way. But I also don't have anything better, so I shrugged as I pointed down one of the trails that seemed to be leading away from both the pit and the muddy trail that brought us here. Nadya and I walked down the trail, careful to step on the stones, hoping to not wake whatever was beneath the dirt. Every time we stepped on the dirt, we could feel it move beneath us. It was deep beneath our feet, but it didn't feel deep enough. Then we paused at one of the crossroads. I could hear the distant ringing of a bell. We should head towards the bell, I told Nadya while she shook her head. We shouldn't head towards the bell. The noise will only wake the Hydra up more. Let's head anywhere else but there. We need to walk down the path that rings true. It may wake what lies beneath the dirt, but that doesn't make it the wrong path. Just because it's the path that doesn't wake up the monster, doesn't mean that it's the right path. Hell, even if we walk away from the right path, the monster may wake anyway, and we might wind up farther from the way out in exchange for nothing. I told her as she shook her head and looked at the path farther away from the bell. That doesn't make sense. That isn't how the world works. That isn't how our world works. That's never been how the world works, she said, turning back to the trail that led away from the bell as she pointed at the trail. See, more people have been down this way. This is the correct way, she said as she turned down the path. Remember what Adansi said, I said as she paused and she turned to me, tears in her eyes. I realized that she was terrified, more scared of this place than she was of the hospital, more scared of the paths and the bell than she was of the hospital and the nurses, and more scared of Adansi than what wore our dad's skin. She just said that to scare us. It doesn't mean anything. She just said it to scare us, Nadya said as I hugged her. A rare act, since I didn't normally hug people. Nadya, this place isn't like Markomania. Hell, it isn't like Earth. If someone says something scary, it's meant to be examined and listened to. Warnings are plentiful here, and they are clear to those who listen. It isn't clear to those who decide to ignore it. Just because it's scary doesn't mean it shouldn't be understood, I told her, and she looked down the path I suggested, and she nodded as I began to lead us toward the bell. We passed by many strange gravestones that had strange things written on them. Sometimes it was something funny, or at least something in the spirit of Samhain. Here lies Christopher. I told you it was serious. Either the wallpaper goes, or I do. Here lies wallpaper. Here lies Karen, died at 103. Only the good die young. Here lies stupid, right next to a grave with an arrow pointing at it that said, I'm with stupid. They were funny, a little scary, but funny. And then there was the graves that were clearly made to scare us, clearly made to distract us. Graves with our parents' names on it, graves with our names on it, and even graves with terms like honor, pride, hope, love, and humanity on it. These were easy for me to ignore, but Nadya kept looking at them, pausing for a moment, almost stepping off the path to look closer at those gravestones, not seeing that there was only fog in front of the gravestones. Only fog and an empty grave with something hungry on the bottom. Nadya, try to focus on the stones that make you smile. The sad ones are trying to trick you to get closer to them, I reminded her, as she glanced at a stone with her name on it. But what if the graves are real? She asked, fear tinging her voice. They only become real if you let yourself fall into them. As long as you keep going, they aren't real. Giving up makes them real, I told her, while the Hydra grumbled beneath our feet, the heads still hiding beneath every headstone. In the distance, I could see the gate, a bell next to it, with a skeletal man next to it. We could see the way out, but also the stone path ended, at least 20 meters away from safety. We would have to walk across the grass that I could see was roiling and boiling with the heads of the Hydra, mere centimeters beneath the soil. Any idea on how we can get past it? Nadya asked, while I glanced at the last 2 gravestones. I looked them over, and when I saw them, my heart ran cold as Nadya looked at them too, confused about why I was scared. The gravestone on the left said, "Here lies Eurydice, died on her wedding day, too busy running to see the snake in the grass." The symbol carved in the stone made me think clearly. Hydra. I glanced over at the other stone. "Here lies Orpheus, never should have turned back." The symbol beneath, a glass of wine. I turned to the grass again, as I thought about what I knew of the myth. "Nadya, I will have to walk first across the grass. You will have to follow. Don't touch me. I can't look back at you, but it is very important that you keep following me. It is important that you only speak when we reach the skeletal docent," I told her as I thought back to the old song that my father taught us both. One of the only songs I knew in Dad's language. A song that the voices referenced in the grave. "What is happening, Valeska?" she asked as I could hear the distant cries of something behind us. Something that sounded hungry, something angry, something mad. "What is that, Valeska?" she asked, and I could hear the panic as I spoke up again. "Nadya, I don't have time to explain. If I explained it, then we won't make it. It is very important that I head first. Don't run, don't get ahead of me, and don't stay still. I need you to trust me. This is from both Dad and Mom's old stories. I need you to trust me," I said as I took a deep breath. I took the first step off the path and onto the grass, and I began to sing. "Don't ever laugh as a hearse goes by, for you may be the next to die. They wrap you up in a big white sheet, from your head down to your feet. They put you in a big black box and cover you up with dirt and rocks, and all goes well for about a week, and then your coffin begins to leak, and the worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, the worms play pinochle on your snout. They eat your eyes, they eat your nose, they eat the jelly between your toes. A big green worm with rolling eyes crawls in your stomach and out your eyes. Your stomach turns a slimy green, and pus comes out like whipping cream. You spread it on a slice of bread, and that's what you eat when you're dead. And the worms crawl out, and the worms crawl in. The worms that crawl in are lean and thin. The ones that crawl out are fat and stout. Your eyes fall in, and your hair falls out. Your brain comes tumbling down your snout. And the worms crawl in, and the worms crawl out. They crawl all over your dirty snout. Your chest caves in, and your eyes pop out, and your brain turns to sauerkraut. They invite their friends, and their friends too. They all come down to chew on you, and this is what it is to die. I hope you had a nice goodbye. Did you ever think, as a hearse goes by, that you may be the next to die? And your eyes fall out, and your teeth decay, and that is the end of a perfect day. Every line was a step forward. Every line the Hydra stilled, like it was listening to me sing. I couldn't look behind me. I couldn't stop singing. I could only trust that Nadya was behind me. I had to remind myself to never look behind myself. Now in that moment, I could feel Orpheus's pain. I couldn't hear her. I couldn't feel her. I could only look forward and trust that she was there. And even with the Hydra settling beneath my feet, it wasn't completely still. It moved like the worms in the song. It squirmed, it dug, and it wiggled. And I knew that if it truly wanted to eat me, that it could. All I had was a feeling and what I knew of the past. Step by step, line by line, I could see the skeletal docent facing me. He could see me. He could see Nadya, if she was following. She has to be following. I know she is scared, but she isn't so scared that she would stay still. It isn't her nature. I could hear the screams getting closer. I wanted to run. I want to hurry. I want to skip a line to get closer, but I stay strong. I know what happens to those that transgress, but I cannot. As scary as it is to walk along the right path, in the right way, it is more dangerous to try to run. The Hydra beneath my feet, and the mad ones chasing us down the trail. She isn't behind you, you know, a voice whispers from beneath my feet. She stayed behind, another voice whispered behind me. She doesn't trust you, the final voice said ahead of me. I almost stutter in my song, but I keep singing. When I reach the end, I sing it again. I cannot trust the Hydra. It has no reason to be honest with me, and it has every reason to make me look, or make Nadya run, or to make me stop singing. Just turn around. Yes, turn around. Orpheus was a hero, a demigod, the greatest of his kind. No one would blame you for making his choice, the voices whispered, but I kept walking towards the docent. The grass settled, but the voices still had something to say. The mad ones are close, mere meters behind. They already got her. They'll get you too. I sang and I stepped. I kept looking forward, my hand out to the docent, who also reached their hand out to me. Why would you ever trust someone like her? She's never going to understand you. She's never going to try to understand you. So why do you try to understand her? You know she doesn't trust you. She could never trust someone like you. The Hydra kept speaking as I stepped onto the same stone as the docent, looking out into the iron bars. With my step on the concrete, my first instinct was to stop singing, to turn around and embrace Nadya, especially when the voices stopped. But I knew that would be a mistake as well. Just because I was safe did not mean that Nadya was safe. She would still be traveling on the grass, and if I stopped singing, the Hydra could easily swallow her. So I kept the path safe as I kept singing. Even when I heard her voice tell me it was safe, I kept singing. Even when I could feel a presence next to me, I kept singing. Only when I felt her familiar hand in my own did I stop and face the docent. Still scared to look at my sister, fearing it might be a trick. "Welcome, guests, to the Phantom Fairgrounds," the skeleton said, producing an old iron key and opening the gate. The gate creaked open, and I could see the tents being set up for the fair. Before I stepped through, the skeleton offered the key to us. "You see, twin children of war, I cannot leave my post, but the key to this gate needs to be kept in the Phantom Fairgrounds, so guests can open the gate to the Crooked Cemetery. Can I trust you both to bring the key to Lycon?" the skeleton asked as I took the key, and only when I stepped across the threshold into the Phantom Fairgrounds did I turn around to see what was behind me. On the grass, I could see Nadya still there, her eyes crazed, full of fear, anger, and hunger. So far from the gate, it looked like she didn't follow me at all through the grass. Then the fog parted, and I could see that there wasn't just one Nadya. There were dozens of her, all of them with eyes just as crazed as the first Nadya, attached to the ground by long, thin cables that looked like snakes. Snakes that pulled all of the Nadyas into the ground, leaving me alone with the true Nadya in the Phantom Fairground. At least, I hope it was the true Nadya. We heard about fairs before, obviously. The field hospital that Dad operated was built on the fairgrounds, but outside of a few stories and a few old pictures from before the days of the war, neither Valeska nor I had ever seen a fair before. The Phantom Fairgrounds we saw was like every story we heard, but it was also very different from every story that we had seen before. There were vendors selling food, but the food was made to look horrifying, or the games that could be played were just a little off, throwing skulls into bottles, throwing axes against targets, or a large pit with logs and rocks that were able to be thrown into a fire pit. And then there were the people wandering around the fairgrounds, some helping set up tents, stands, raking leaves into big piles, or pushing rocks out of the walkways. The people were not normal people. Some of them looked normal, others looked a little off. A carny with 2 different colored eyes, someone pushing rocks that had sharp teeth, and then there were those who didn't look like people. While I walked into the Phantom Fairgrounds, I stepped carefully. Everyone felt scary. Everyone felt like they were staring at me, and I was afraid I would do something that would make everyone angry at me, or worse, want to hurt me. But Valeska lit up in a way I never saw him light up before. It was like he was among friends or people familiar with him. The way he moved forward and with enthusiasm was not something I even knew Valeska was capable of as I followed him. One of the first stops we made was at a booth that had an airsoft gun that could shoot balls of paint. The worker was setting up targets in the booth when she turned around, and my breath froze in my lungs when I saw her face. The right half of her face was normal, pale maybe, but normal, long dark hair, red lipstick on her lips, and even shiny eyeshadow on her eyelid. Then the left half of her face was completely skeletal, with no flesh at all. Her socket was empty, with a lit tea candle inside, replacing her missing eye. Her exposed teeth had a thin veneer of gold, with carvings of waves and boats in the veneer. On her cheekbones and foreheads were colored gems carved into her bone, reflecting the light of the night, but with the gems flush with her skull. As we approached, she smiled with her human lips, while Valeska spoke. "I love your gems, they look gorgeous," Valeska said, as her human lips smiled wider, and she looked us both over. "I see. We have a few early bird helpers. What do you think of my booth?" she said as she stepped aside to let us look at the target. They were square-painted plywood. I could see a pumpkin-headed scarecrow holding a bag of candy, a smiling witch with a big hat holding a broom, and behind them were two normal men. "Now tell me, children, what do you think?" the half-dead woman asked us as I spoke up. "I think it looks like fun. Do we get a prize for shooting the most targets?" I asked as the woman looked at us, and then back at her targets. "Right, you must be new to this, but I think it's fair to explain. You pick up the paintball gun, and you fire the paintballs at the danger, but be careful not to hit the innocent ones. Do you know which is which?" she asked as I picked up the paintball gun. "I can see which is which," I said as I aimed at the two monsters, and I pulled the trigger. I had 4 shots before I ran out of paintballs, 2 at the witch and 2 at the scarecrow, the red marks staining their center mass. "I see. But does your brother want to play?" she said, offering a different gun to Valeska as he took it. He aimed carefully, and he also fired 4 times, his paintballs hitting the 2 targets painted like people, leaving 4 blue marks on them. "You hit the wrong targets," I told Valeska as he put down the gun. He scrunched up his face in confusion. "But I thought..." "Valeska, she said to shoot the monsters and not shoot the people. Surely that was clear?" "Nadya, Valeska, you need to learn to listen if you want to be accepted," I said as Valeska's shoulders slumped a little. The familiar slump of when he messed up and he was going to go quiet and withdraw into himself to try and make sure he didn't make the same mistake again. Sometimes he went quiet for a few minutes or a few hours, but eventually he would be back to his old self in no time. Well, we have a winner. I know it's just a test, but I think it's only fair to give a prize out for being such good playtesters," the woman said as she grabbed a backpack with a black cat on the back, a backpack that would be far nicer than anything I had back home. As she brought the backpack over, I reached out for it, but I saw her lips half frown. "The prize isn't for you. Valeska was the one who hit the targets, and he's the one who avoided the innocents," she said as she handed the bag to Valeska, who smiled a little more at being given a prize. "But you said to shoot the monsters and avoid the people," I said as I pointed at the targets as the woman glanced at the targets, and she shook her head as she explained. "No, I said shoot the danger and avoid shooting the innocent ones. I even asked if you knew which was which. You said you did," the woman said, like that explanation was enough. "But the monsters are clearly a threat," I said, pointing at the targets while Valeska whispered to me. "Nadya, look at the targets. Really look at them," Valeska advised while I looked closer at the targets. The scarecrow was smiling. It was holding a candy bag. The witch was smiling and holding a broom. Behind them were 2 people, a man and a woman. The man held an axe in his hands, and his face was furious, like all of the hate in the world were in his eyes. The woman held a long knife, and her eyes were wild, and her mouth stuck in a grim line. "I don't see what you're seeing," I told Valeska as he shook his head, and the woman simply shrugged. "It's okay, Nadya. Just accept that you need to listen, the woman said as I felt a bolt of anger shoot through my heart. How dare this monster tell me that I need to listen? Then I felt Valeska's hand on my shoulder, and my mood cooled a little. Thank you, Hell, for the backpack and letting us play. We're looking for Lycone. Do you know where they might be? He asked as she looked around, and she pointed towards the other stands. Last I saw, he was wandering around the petting zoo. Don't be afraid to check out the other stands. There's lots of performances, games, tricks, and treats for you to enjoy, she said as Valeska smiled as he led me away from the stall. How did you get her name? I asked as he pointed at the sign over the stall. It said, Hell's Deadshot. How did I miss that? I asked as we continued. I think it's like the targets. You were only looking at one part and you didn't see everything. Things are different here. Some of the details that are important at home aren't important here, and some of the details that aren't important at home are important here. The details that I always noticed mean big things here, he said as he pointed at a stall where a man in a red and white pinstripe suit was setting up glass bottles in a pyramid. I didn't know what he was pointing at, even when I tried looking very hard. The glass bottles were clear with a light blue. The back of the booth was painted with a target. The man looked completely normal. His eyes were a bit bored. The sign simply said, Bottle Toss, a game so simple even I couldn't get it wrong. He even had a few stacked balls ready to be thrown, and a sign that said it cost 1 forint to play, which was pretty cheap all things considered. What are you seeing that I'm not seeing? I asked as Valeska looked more frustrated with me. The look on his face was familiar. The same look that I could see on Mom's face when she was trying to explain something to Valeska, and he just wouldn't understand, especially when she didn't know what words would help him understand. A look that I knew I had on my face many times. Now that I was the one facing it, I couldn't help but feel more frustrated with him. Why couldn't he just tell me the answer instead of trying to make me figure it out myself? Look at what's different from his stall and the stall next to him, Valeska said as I turned to the stall next to the bottle toss. The next stall had balloons dangling on the back of the wall. That carny wore all black and only had one eye in the middle of his head. He had darts ready to be thrown, and he had stuffed animals hanging from the roof of his booth. Little stuffed animals that were barely bigger than my hand. The sign advertised it as a dart toss. Is it because the first stall is a monster? Is that why you don't like him, because he's human? I asked Valeska as he shook his head. Just because he looks human doesn't make him human, but no, that isn't it. It isn't something esoteric. It's something you can see if you pay attention, but I don't think it's obvious to you like it's obvious to me. Is that what it's like? He asked as I only nodded, as he finally pointed at the sign, saying the bottle toss was 1 forint. That is the only stall that is charging money to play. It's also the only stall that has no prizes. If you go to that stall, you will pay to play the game, and you can win nothing, he said as I looked at it. He can't do that, and yet he is. It isn't honest. He isn't charging when he says it's free. He isn't saying he has prizes when he doesn't. What part of that isn't not honest? Maybe he does have a prize, but it's more valuable than the others? I asked as Valeska sighed. That isn't how it works here. You know how it works for you back home, but here it doesn't work the same way, he said as we continued, and we found another stall with a very unusual game. The man in the stall was tall, dark, and older than any man I had seen before. His cane had a dog's head carved into it. The way he moved, it was like the cane pulled him, and he was holding it back. His white beard trimmed well. His large top hat and dark suit were so well made that even the princes of Marcomannia would be jealous of him. In front of him were 5 different wallets of different color and different quality. Above him hung flowers and drying herbs. The sign on the back said, "Papa's Wallet Game." "Welcome to my humble stall, children. This game has a winner every time. Usually, me," the old man said with a chuckle, as Valeska laughed as well. I didn't laugh. "Now, this game here is simple. Guess which wallet here is my wallet. Every wallet here contains something. My wallet contains the most valuable prize," the old man said as I looked over the wallets. It seemed easy enough, but I still hesitated, so I decided to ask. "So I just pick a wallet and I get to keep the wallet?" I asked the old man, who chuckled like I said something funny. "You get to keep what's inside of the wallet. I'm afraid I need to keep the wallets for others to play," he said as he tapped his cane 4 times on the ground. "And none of the wallets contain nothing?" I asked. "Everything contains nothing. Nothing contains anything. Anything contains everything." "But sweetheart, if you're asking if the prize inside of the wallet is non-physical, I can promise you that the prizes are physical and can be carried. I can also promise that they are all valuable, although their values are measured in different ways." "What do you mean by that?" If you had a kilogram of copper coins and a kilogram of bills, which pile weighs more?" "They weigh the same." "Excellent. But which one of the piles is worth more?" "The bills." "Now, if you value the piles by weight, then the copper coins is equal value. And if you value money, then the bills are more valuable. But both have value," he said as I thought it over, digesting it in my mind, but figuring I had the answer. "Can I ask for a clue on which wallet is yours?" "Yes. Look at me. Look at where I stand. Look at what I value, and you will know which wallet is mine and what it is I value the most," the old man said as I looked it over. The stall was in the middle of where 4 different paths of the fairgrounds met, a sort of roundabout between the cardinal directions. He was dressed in a very nice and very comfortable suit. His hat on his head had traces of purple filigree, but then for a moment he was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a long white robe with a straw hat on his head. He stood only with the help of a crutch, but his smiling face remained. I could see flowers hanging from the roof of the stall, a candy bowl within easy reach of him, small candy within wax paper that was easy for him to eat and enjoy, a bottle of dark rum with an old clay shot glass next to it. Then he was once again in his fancy suit with the expensive hat. I had my answer. I could see a worn-down pink wallet, a green wallet with a golden dollar sign on it, a polka dot white and black wallet, a wallet of black leather, and finally a purple leather wallet with actual gold inlaid in it. "I think this is your wallet," I said, grabbing the expensive purple leather. The gold and the purple told me the wallet was expensive. A man in such a fancy suit was clearly someone who was going to value money and wealth the most. I opened the wallet to see that it indeed had money in it. 100,000 for rent in 5,000 for rent bills. I eagerly grabbed the red prints as I looked them over. Sure enough, they were real. Well, princess, I see you made your choice, and that is no small prize you selected. But tell me, prince, which wallet do you think is mine? He asked as Valeska grabbed the pink wallet as he opened it. Inside of the wallet was no money, no bills. The only thing inside was a single folded photograph. Well, maybe next time, Valeska, I told him as I counted the money in my hands again, as I thought about what I could buy with this. I could buy actual candy from one of the soldiers, or I could even buy a new dress or two for myself, and have enough left over to buy new blankets. As I tucked the bills into my socks, as Valeska unfolded the photo. As he did, I could see him tear up as he looked up at the old man. Thank you. Thank you so much, he said as I peeked at his prize, trying to figure out what it was that made my brother cry. I could see the folded photograph was a picture of the family together. Mom and Dad were standing on the steps of the church, both of them holding small infants in their arms, holding us. A picture I never knew was taken, a memory I didn't know was lost, not until it was in Valeska's hands. The old man offered us both candy as we snacked on them, and we kept walking towards the petting zoo. At one of the stalls, there was a big cauldron that had cold smoke billow out of it, as a headless man in black and red armor offered us drinks from the cauldron, offered in wax cups. Valeska took both cups eagerly as he held one out to me. As I glanced inside of it, it looked like normal apple cider, and even smelled like it, but I couldn't figure out why it was making cold smoke inside of the cauldron. No magic needed for that. There's water and dry ice inside of the cauldron, and then a bowl on top of the water and dry ice where the apple cider is kept. It makes it spooky, but it's harmless, Valeska said as he drank it, and I drank it as well. Sure enough, it was apple cider, delicious and normal as always. As we got closer to the petting zoo, we could smell the animals before we could see them. And then, when we finally saw the petting zoo, we could see the many animals in the zoo. We could see jackalopes hopping around, rubbing their antlers against the wooden fence, sheep with black wool happily bleating, a goat that walked on two legs, and then in one corner of the petting zoo, we could see a fenced-off section with a very large dog inside. A large dog that had the name LeAnne written on a fence over its section. So, do we just head inside and put the key on his collar? I asked, seeing that he had a collar with a hook on it that could fit the key we were given. But when I looked into the dog's eyes, the dog looked back, and it didn't feel like it liked me. I think we have to let the dog come to us. We shouldn't be chasing the dog, Valeska said as he stepped inside of the fenced area as he sat down, the dog watching him from the distance. Let the dog get close to us. If we try to chase the dog, he'll keep running, and he won't let us give him the key. We can still wear him down as long as we keep walking, I suggested as Valeska shook his head. That won't make him like us. If you have to wear someone down to make them do what you want, then they aren't doing so willingly. That sounds like something that Bathory would do, not something I would do, he said as he continued to wait, as the dog finally began to get closer and closer to him. Now LeAnne was curious, sniffing and getting more curious, while Valeska remained still. As the dog got closer, Then finally he was in arm's reach. I expected Valeska to put the key on his collar immediately. Instead, he let the dog sniff him. Then he offered his hand to the dog as he pet Lycon. After a few pets, he slipped the key on Lycon's collar, continuing to pet the dog before he finally stood, and he left the pen. The large gray dog now curling up to sleep inside, while Valeska left with me. He looked around us in awe, while I glanced around, not sure what he was seeing. This place, I can help people in places like this, Valeska said as he glanced around at the others, who were finishing their setup of the Phantom Fairgrounds. Valeska, this place, it isn't right. It feels like everything I do is wrong. I need someone to explain everything to me, and even when I think I understand something, I only realize afterwards that I'm wrong. How can you help people in a place like this? I asked, only for Valeska to look at me, and I realized what I was saying. Oh. Yeah. Back home, I had to hide my gift. I have to pretend that I don't see anything when I do. I always have to look the other way when the quiet man visits. I have to always watch out for the Civil Legion. The only way that I can help people is by pretending that I can't. Nadya, you can help people in the hospital. You can help people in the apartment. You can help people in the city. If I go back, I'll spend the rest of my life never being able to help people, because if I tried, I'd be taken away. Here, I don't have to explain myself constantly. I can learn more about the world. I can help those that come to visit, Valeska said as I turned to him, then back to the gate that led out of the fairgrounds. Valeska, this world isn't real. The real world isn't like this. The real world. A world where candy doesn't exist except as a story from our great-grandparents. A world where games are too dangerous because it might attract the attention of the Civil Legion. A world where everyone dies randomly and with no hope for survival. And you can't even mourn those who died. A world where if someone hates you, they kill you. A world where if someone loves you, they still kill you. A world that pretends that magic doesn't exist. A world where everyone wears a mask and everyone pretends that they aren't hurt because they fear more pain. The pumpkin house doesn't pretend the world out there isn't real, but the world out there acts like places like the pumpkin house aren't real. Nadya, this world is very real. The people here are very real. The visitors here are very real. I can be a hero here, just like you are a hero out there. Valeska, are you sure? I asked, and he nodded. I thought about staying with him. I thought about leaving Markomania behind, but I knew I couldn't be happy living here forever. Just like how Valeska was always out of place in the exoteric world, I would always be out of place in an esoteric one. So I turned from Valeska, and for the first time in our lives, we walked down different paths as I made my way to the gates, stepping beyond the pumpkin house. When I left through the gates, I woke up in the field hospital, a light in my eyes as the nurse was bringing my heart back to a normal rhythm. Valeska laid in a bed next to mine, his heart no longer beating as the nurses finally declared time of death. I tried to speak, only to find that I couldn't talk. Not that night, at least. All I could do was watch as the nurses ran around me, trying to keep me and others alive. Eventually, I learned from the snippets of conversation that a bomb was dropped in the apartment building. And while it didn't go off, it crushed my parents, and the spray of splinters put me and Valeska into a near-death state. We were brought to the field hospital by Baba Yaga, our hearts stopping and restarting, until finally the nurses could stabilize me. They weren't able to stabilize Valeska, although I'm not sure if they tried to save him as hard as they tried to save me. I was still in the hospital bed, still healing from the wounds, when we got the news from the palace. On November 11th, at about 11 a.m., the tyrant was assassinated by his heir, and now an armistice was declared as the rest of the Central Cabal also declared a ceasefire, scared to keep fighting when they realized they would be fighting alone. That night, for the first time in my life, where I slept without the sound of planes or artillery. When I finally recovered enough to head home, there wasn't anything I could salvage. Most of the apartment was destroyed in the attack. Anything that looters couldn't take was destroyed by the elements. Nothing left I could take with me except the clothes on my back. I had no relatives left in Markomania, but since I didn't want to stay in a Bathory-ran orphanage, I contacted my aunt in Kimru, who said I could stay with her. So, as difficult as it was to leave Markomania, at the same time, I was leaving nothing behind. I had my memories with me, and a future to look forward to in Kimru. And while I wanted to believe that my time in the pumpkin house was a dream, or a hallucination, or at least not real, I had one big piece of evidence that told me the pumpkin house was real, and that Valeska was still there. When I came to, and I finally recovered enough to move, I found 300,000 for rent in my sock, enough money to bring me to a new life, and all I could hope was that my brother still remembered me next time I visited him. My first few weeks in the pumpkin house were the best of my life. I learned more about my gift and the esoteric world than I ever did in my years in Markomania. I had my room in the house, and the house always felt like it was shifting. The rooms were always where I could reach them with ease, and I could always find who or what I was looking for without trying too hard or too long. At first, Adansi had my role in the house to explain the rules and how things worked to the visitors. Every time something that felt obvious to me wasn't obvious to them for some strange reason, I would just have to explain it to them. Adansi said it was because I was already half in anyways, and that gave me insight in areas others didn't have. So I would try other roles, running a stall, tour guide, docent to the gates, even acted as a lore keeper once or twice. But it never worked quite as well as just explaining the how and why of things. As my gift developed, I made my way up, eventually giving myself the honor of calling myself a harbinger, warning the guests not just of their own dangers they faced in the house, but also the dangers they faced outside of the house as well. There, I had to learn how to see beyond sight, to know beyond knowing, and to warn beyond warning, to understand both the challenges of the pumpkin house and the challenges inside of their hearts. I believe I have helped many, but even if I miss Nadya sometimes, I feel like I am home and I cannot wait to see her again. Unfairly laid to rest, blanketed by the clammy, crumbling earth, our fingers intertwined, even in death, our hearts still beat as one. We await our heroine, our breathing non-existent, as the Hydra listens closely, even in slumber. My sister, often right, leads the way, but in the horizon, where sun meets the clouds, the celestial ritual of day transforming into night, the bell remains still, the way out is near.